Welcome everybody. Thank you for attending tonight's lecture. I am Jim Riggins. I'm a member of the board of the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. Before we get into our lecture tonight, just for those of you that are not familiar with our organization, I would like to give you a quick background. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, both at the state level and the boards of all of the regional chapters are staffed by unpaid volunteers. We have a mission of promoting the value and benefits of renewable energy and energy efficiency through our three pillars of education, policy advocacy, community engagement. We are able to provide these free lectures and post them both on YouTube and online through generous donations of members and donors. And if you would like more information or to join CRES or to donate to our organization, you can find us at CRES-energy.org. And also on that website, we now have over 90 educational and informational videos, a couple of samples at the bottom of the slide, and we're adding somewhere between 8 and 10 every year to that library. So I think most, if not all of us, were surprised, maybe shocked in August when news came out that the Build Back Better Act actually had sufficient votes in the Senate for passage, but in a stripped down version, which came to be known as the Inflation Reduction Act, signed into law by the president in September. Even in its stripped down version, though, the content is substantial. The IRA has sections and actions on corporate tax reform, funding the IRS, deficit reduction, prescription drug pricing, Affordable Care Act subsidies, and then a large section on energy security with approximately 12 subcategories. Those subcategories broadly can be labeled as clean electricity, clean fuel, clean vehicles, and energy efficiency. And there's also a section on clean energy manufacturing. It would take us days to go through the entire act. We are going to focus tonight on one small subset of it, which is solar energy and energy storage. And we could not have a better speaker or expert to discuss that portion of the Inflation Reduction Act with us. Mike Kruger has served as the president and CEO of the Colorado Solar and Storage Association since October of 2018. Previously, he was the director of communications for the Smart Electric Power Alliance in Washington, D.C., where he oversaw public communications, research reports, and awards programs for the organization. Prior to that, Mr. Kruger was the Deputy Director of Communications for the U.S. Department of Commerce under the Obama administration. He also served on the communications staff for the U.S. House of Representatives Education and Labor Committee. Mr. Kruger earned a Master's of Arts in Education and Social Justice from the University of London and a Bachelor of Arts in History from Western Washington University. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. I am going to give you the screen and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it very much. Well, good evening, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here with you. Like was mentioned, my name is Mike Kruger. I'm the CEO of the Colorado Solar and Storage Association. So we're a trade association for all the folks that do hard work. I'll be honest, I'm on a keyboard all day. I don't do any real work. But the folks who are doing the hard work of putting solar and energy storage on a roof, in a garage, or in a field, probably near you. And as Jim mentioned, the amount of emotions that we've gone through this year around what was originally the Build Back Better and now is the Inflation Reduction Act we've been high, we've been low, and now we're still trying to get our feet underneath us. It was hundreds of pages long. The parts related to renewable energy themselves were, I think, 350 pages. So I've tried to distill a lot of that down. I have shared my slides with Jim, and if folks are able to get those afterwards, that's perfectly acceptable. And I know there's plenty of time for questions. I'll do my best. I'm not an attorney, so I just sort of play one on webinars on Wednesday evenings, but hopefully we can find you the answers you need. Coming from a business background, I'm looking at this as what are the ways in which there's a chance to both save the world and make some money. And I think one of the key lessons here was that for 30 plus years, folks have been scolding kind of society in general and specific actors, within the economy to say you're ruining the economy, you should clean up your act. It moved the needle a little bit, but the Inflation Reduction Act here, I think, is really supercharges that by providing, by sort of aligning market incentives and market outcome, or desired policy outcomes with the chance for folks to make a little bit of money. So on a just individual note, if you're looking to add solar or storage, you now have a 30% investment tax credit. And that is good for the next 10 years. So I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on the personal homeowner stuff. There is quite a bit in there about how you can get money for an upgrade for your personal residential electrical panel, heat pumps, electric vehicles. But today really is focused on large scale deployment, both individual projects of large size as well as large volumes of projects around the Inflation Reduction Act, or sorry, around climate change through the Inflation Reduction Act. And also some of the industrial policy that's in there. This is, I'm 46. Most of my life has been let the market do what the market does, and the government has stayed out of picking winners and losers. This is definitely not that. This is a shot across the bow at international actors who we no longer trust or feel like they're not trustworthy, and instead is definitely incentivizing domestic manufacturing of many of the products that are vital for a clean energy future. So with that, let's jump right in. So the first thing that is probably most important for folks, because honestly, climate change impacts them here, now, where they're at, which is what do we know about improving the resilience of the grid? So this is about $280 billion, or sorry, let me just do the 369 billion is the total amount of money available through tax incentives and grants and other loan products. About 280 billion, that will be the tax incentives for clean energy, and then clean electricity gets a further about 121 billion on that. There's 22.6 billion for decarbonizing transportation. If you own a fleet, so not an individual vehicle, but a fleet of vehicles, there's actually a bunch of money to help you pay for that changeover. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but a lot of money to boost domestic manufacturing, additional funds for greenhouse gas reduction, which is quite anomalous at this point. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. And then 20 billion for conservation and agricultural programs. So recognizing that the rural parts of the country have a vital role to play here in helping attack the greenhouse gas problem and climate change, both stopping it and mitigating it. So let's talk about specifically domestic renewable energy production. I think the reason why I was invited to attend tonight. So there are primarily one vehicle to do this, which is tax credits. So we've had tax credits as a vehicle for domestic electricity production for going on almost 20 years now. Wind originally got some investment tax credits that moved to a production tax credit. Solar has benefited from investment tax credits. Here, these get applied to even more items. We'll get to that a little bit later, but the key thing here is also energy storage. It used to be that if you had energy storage, you had to attach it to one of the other resources, one of the other technologies that would apply, that could benefit from the investment tax credit. Now, energy storage, and primarily for me, what I mean by this is lithium-ion batteries, although it could be any number of other emerging technologies, but that can get by itself now 30% tax credit. So you don't have to attach it to some other electricity generator. There's now 30 billion in targeted grants and loan programs. So that's going to be, I think, primarily focused on communities that are looking to add solar locally, who are starved of capital. And then there's also, and they'll either be given out through the energy office or potentially through a local utility. Primarily, I think we'll see that through municipal or rural electric utilities. There are some loan programs, we'll get to that a little bit later, around manufacturing, as well as grid hardening. And then one thing I would point out here is that for the first time in a long time, we've had direct pay in the past, but for the first time in a long time, there's now direct pay, which tax credits are great if you have a tax liability. But if you're a nonprofit, if you're a rural co-op, if you're a municipal electric utility, you don't have a tax liability. So therefore, for a long time, those folks couldn't take advantage of any of these investment tax credits. Now what'll happen is if your rural cooperative decides to go out and put a solar facility on their grid and they wish to own and operate it, they can then take and get directly paid by the IRS 30% of the total investment cost. So if it were a $1 million project, you would get, the co-op or the muni would get $300,000 back from Uncle Sam. Similarly, if you're a nonprofit and you're doing a smaller project, so say you're a homeless shelter, an animal shelter, even schools, potentially even hospitals, depending on how they file with the federal government, could put in a system on their own site and get 30% back. There were ways in which folks could work around that. We had what were called third-party power purchase agreements, and we had some other kind of interesting contractual structures to facilitate that in the past, but this makes it much cleaner and much easier. So that's an exciting place for, I think, the non-Excel, non-Black Hills part of Colorado. So let's talk a little bit about production tax credits. You get a tax credit based upon what you produce. So what this incentivizes is really good behavior. We want to get these clean renewable resources on the grid, and we want them producing a lot of kilowatt hours or megawatt hours, depending on how you're going to measure them. Here's kilowatt hours, because the idea being you want those to displace fossil generation. So it doesn't do any good to build a wind turbine or install a solar facility and then have it not produce. So production tax credits come out here. You can see you get a third of a cent per kilowatt hour produced. However, and this is, again, I talked about this being a little bit of industrial policy at the top of the presentation. The bill provides additional incentives if you're paying prevailing wage on your projects and if you have a federal apprenticeship program. So that way folks are receiving higher wages as well as getting into programs which are transferable and which also moves them up the kind of the career ladder. So I expect that we will see these broadly across the board. There's just too much money on the table to not take advantage of that. Additionally, and I think this is a real boon for our wind energy production, Vestas here in Colorado, which is that if you use domestic content, you get 10% more on top of that. So if you're already maxed out at 1.5 cents, you can then use domestic content. You could add another 0.15 or take you up to 1.65, which may not sound like very much, but when you're producing millions of kilowatt hours annually, an extra penny is real money. So what we see primarily is that wind takes this because they have such large projects. And then the larger solar projects will probably take the production tax credit. By larger, I mean projects that are going to be 50 megawatts or bigger. That's about 250 to 300 acre projects will take this. If you're below that, it just doesn't pencil over the lifetime of the project. But the larger ones will almost certainly take the production tax credit. The alternative is the investment tax credit. And this is really simple. How much did you spend? Multiply it by the percentage, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then that's your tax credit. And so it starts off starting in a couple of years. There's a couple of years transition here where right now, if you were to install a large solar facility, you would get the 30% straight up. But starting in January of 25, You start at 6% as a base, you get 12% if you pay prevailing wage, and another 12% if you are able to meet those federal apprenticeship requirements. Additionally, you can stack on another 10% if you are using domestic content. I'll tell you that the definition of domestic content is pages long in the bill, but primarily it just starts off, I think, at 40% of the stuff on your project needs to be from domestic sources, and then over the rest of the decade ramps up where I think it gets to either 80 or 90%. So you can add 10% to that. And then additionally, there's a thing called an energy community that has been created in federal statute. This is a community which is adversely impacted by the transition from fossil to renewables. In your neck of the woods, Pueblo County will almost certainly count, being that it has had a long history of being a coal-fired generation there and being a source of energy through coal. Those three facilities there in Pueblo County, the Comanche, will be shut down over the next decade. But that will almost certainly ensure that they will meet that. That's an additional 10%. So we're still waiting on official rules from the IRS, but there's no world in which we can imagine that Pueblo County wouldn't exist. So therefore, if you were a solar project and you were paying prevailing wage, you were part of a federal apprenticeship program, you were in Pueblo County and you were using domestic content, you could actually get 50% of your investment back in the form of a tax credit. So that helps lower the cost of energy dramatically, as you can imagine. Not only solar, there is a whole host of things that you can also apply this towards. And so some of them are kind of interesting, like biogas, potentially some waste energy recovery, standalone storage I mentioned. So that's a very exciting thing. And again, this goes for 10 years. So we have a really clear runway in the kind of the recent past, the last 20 years or so. The window is always much shorter. So there's a hurry up, get a project done, and then pull back because maybe there'd be a cliff and you wouldn't get a tax credit. They'd often get extended, of course, but no one knew that. So now we have a clear runway to really go forward and plan out a reasonable and clear future where we can get projects going and not worry that if they're not in service and energized by a certain date, that they won't qualify, which gives a lot of certainty to the industry and allows us, with certainty, we're allowed to borrow money cheaper. We're allowed much clearer that we can hire folks and they'll have a continuing career with us. So a big deal. A couple other things that you may be interested in: energy efficient commercial buildings. So there's a bunch of money that are tax provisions here. If you wish to upgrade your commercial building, depending on how you do it, you can get anywhere between $1.80 and $5 per square foot. And then going forward, what we're going to see is we're going to go away for a wind and solar and energy storage production or investment tax credit to a clean energy production tax credit. And the key thing here is that you're producing electricity with zero GHG emissions. So this could open up the door to things like nuclear, green hydrogen. Those are probably the two that potentially have been talked about here in Colorado, or other future technologies we don't know about. But the key thing here is that to qualify, you have to have zero GHGs. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And so there's certainly some debate around, for example, green hydrogen, if that would actually qualify, if that would work, because there is potential to create some nitrous oxides, which potentially have trouble in the atmosphere. There's concerns about how that all would work out. But broadly, it opens the door to a lot more technologies, as long as they're not contributing to our climate change and the impact there. The other element is, that's great, Kruger, we can build all this stuff, but let's be honest, we still basically rely upon China. For batteries, we rely upon Democratic Republic of Congo, Russia, lots of places that we have no business supporting if we wish to be exemplifying our values. Exactly right, and the federal government has addressed that. This is absolutely where industrial policy comes in. So there is a ton of money in grants and tax credits to help get the industrial manufacturing. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. Apologies. This is actually money to help those who are already doing industrial manufacturing to lower the greenhouse gas emissions. So I would expect, for example, that the cement factory there would be getting some federal support in the form of grants or tax credits to help capture the carbon that they produce during the production of cement, which just naturally produces that. And so there's the ability for anybody who's putting off the steel mill, for example, could be, we think we'll see some oil and gas folks get involved on this on methane capture. So there's a bunch of money there. Below that, the next one is the production tax credit. So this is a desire to really get manufacturing domestically, whether that's going to be solar panels or wind turbines, batteries, heat pumps, etc. So and throws a bunch of money into electric vehicles as well. So what we look at here is the advanced manufacturing production tax credit, wide open, all qualified components and critical mineral sales that feed into the solar and storage and wind and clean energy future. And the key thing is there's no competition. So if you just make this stuff, if you make lithium, if you mine cobalt, arguably if you start to assemble panels or cells, as long as you're doing it, you get it. You don't. There's not a situation where you may not get it, which again gives certainty to investments. If you're going to build these facilities, you need to know that you're going to be able to get your money back. So there is a hope, an effort to get lower cost. We, as an industry, went offshore, went to China, went to Southeast Asia for the manufacturing of these items. We ran into a huge problem in 2020 and 2021 related to both COVID and the Uyghur the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, I think it's called, where China is using the Uyghur population of Western China to mine these materials, sometimes even manufacture these items. And so hoping that tax credits will be part of the key puzzle to bring these important components and critical materials back to the US. So, and we've got lots of opportunity here. It was never really cost-wise, it was never really very competitive. This changes that. So we saw, for example, our first cobalt mine announcement that's going to open up in Idaho, assuming it gets permitted. We've seen lots of lithium, which is a key element in both solar and batteries, being announced. We've seen expansions of manufacturing plants for solar panels already announced due to this tax credit. Of potential interest to y'all is the fact that there are now clean hydrogen and carbon capture tax credits. And there's probably a role here in Colorado. I'm obviously a solar and battery guy, and I'm pretty biased towards that. But there is very generous tax credits for clean hydrogen. And the way that works is you basically take water, you use renewable energy, and you split it into the H, which you capture, and the O2, which you let off into the atmosphere. And there's a couple of ways in which a couple of things you can do with the hydrogen. You can turn it into a fuel cell, and then that has no emissions, and it just basically creates electricity by moving back and forth. You can combine hydrogen with nitrogen, and you can make ammonia, which we use in any number of capacities. But one is you could turn that into fertilizer. You can also burn it. It's not great when you burn it, but it is ammonia is pretty easy to store. Hydrogen itself, you have to store at very cold temperatures. But you could burn it in a pinch. For example, this is not shocking to us. We know that the sun goes down every day. In fact, if it doesn't, there's a whole lot of bigger concerns than your solar panels. And likewise, the wind guys know that the wind doesn't blow every day. So occasionally you need some backup. Clean hydrogen potentially could be that solution. And for those of you that are following along with our kind of carbon budget, you understand that concept of there's only so much carbon we can put in the atmosphere before we really start to see horrendous effects of climate change. Carbon capture is a way in which to claw back some of those carbon that we've been burning in the atmosphere and continue to burn in the atmosphere. In Colorado, because we have such a long history in extraction and oil and gas, there seems to be some opportunities here for carbon capture. So grab the carbon out of the air, or potentially at a single source like at the cement factory, and then pump that back into the ground, either as a gas or potentially turning it into a solid, basically turning it into limestone. So that's those are also in there. The Department of Energy got a ton of money, and they've got a bunch of loan guarantees that they can spend on all kinds of things. So we're hoping that the loan guarantees will be able to back up many of the projects that we're working on. I know that those either really geeks like this, that the gentleman who's in charge of this is named Jigger Shaw, and Jigger is looking for projects that are, able to have a gigaton impact, either through carbon capture or through displacing where carbon would normally be an or an exhaust from some process or from something. So huge amounts of money from the DOE to get around loan guarantees. Great thing about loan guarantees is that they provide super low cost financing because there's no risk for someone financing, because if you default, the government will pay. And so since it lowers the risk, you get a lower interest rate. As you know, interest rates are going up right now. Primarily, everything we've talked about requires a lot of borrowed money. And so when interest rates go up, all of these things get more expensive. A loan guarantee allows the risk to come down, the interest rate to come down. And the loan guarantee program has had a few very well-known failures, but most of their money gets paid back, and they never have to pay on the loans they've guaranteed. So, and very famously, they backed Tesla when Tesla looked like it was going to have real trouble, and obviously Tesla is now making huge amounts of money, as well as changing the world through their vehicles and batteries and things. So, so what are the next steps, right? What are we looking at here? This is kind of my final slide, and then we'll probably move over to questions. But the end of next month, we think Excel will be putting out a request for proposal for nearly 5 gigawatts of solar and wind and batteries. All of that to be online, hopefully by the end of the decade. 2032 is the furthest out we want to see that come on. Really, we want to see it all done by 2030, if not sooner. And that's roughly $4.7 billion of new investment in the state, and a chance to actually kind of rewire the entire electricity sector. And it's roughly a third of all the electricity which will be produced in the state. So it's a not insignificant amount of new solar and wind that will be put up for a request for proposal at the end of this month. Bids will be due the end of February. Winners will find out in June, and then the process begins. About roughly a 24-month clock starts ticking to try to get those things built and connected, and making it very easy for us to take our coal and hopefully even our natural gas offline. A couple other things that are interesting is there are all these aging oil and gas wells. You can see I've put a little map up there of many of the orphan wells. This is all northeast Colorado, so it's not necessarily where you guys are at, but there's hundreds of them, and currently they're just open and leaking methane. If the state can work with the carbon capture folks to potentially reverse that, instead fill them full of carbon and plug them, it's a twofer. Stops the methane from leaking, also captures carbon. So I would expect there'll be whoever can figure that out will make a ton of money. Like they will swim in money, like what's the Scrooge McDuck, right? And then finally, Governor Polis has gotten behind this with a couple other states here in our region about being a hydrogen power hub. And there's again, no one knows exactly how hydrogen is going to be used, but we all believe that there's a real key element for clean hydrogen and green hydrogen in the future. And with the IRA tax credits that make it there's a lot of money to make in hydrogen if you can figure it out. That's more of the story. So those are probably some next big steps. Individually for your communities, it all really depends. There's tons of opportunity. I was just in the southeast corner at Lamar, and I talked to county commissioners from 6 of the counties down there, and they have a chance to really to rewire their entire economy down there. They're going to get a lot of transmission. Therefore, if you have transmission, it's like being on the highway. It's like a key element of the infrastructure, and that will attract a lot of solar and wind to that area. So we're working with them to make sure they understand potentially how to take advantage of that, how to do it in a way that's friendly to their communities and doesn't end up being an eyesore because these, or problematic for the community in some way, because these items will be there 20 or 30 years. So that, we want to be a good neighbor. We want to be a good member of the community as someone who will be there for at least a generation. So tons of opportunity. I think with that, and just about where I thought I'd be, I'll turn it over to our moderator. I think that was you, Jim, right? That take some questions.
Yeah, hey, thank you very much, Mike. That was fantastic. And we really appreciate you presenting your thoughts and views on this very complicated subject. We do have some questions coming in, but I'd like to start with one of mine.
Sure.
The organizer prerogative. You have your finger on the pulse of the solar market probably better than anybody else in the state of Colorado. At the utility level, new projects ground to a halt in the April-May timeframe with the Department of Commerce announcement of the anti-dumping investigation against 4 Southeast Asian countries, combined with supply chain issues. And then all of a sudden we have an announcement that the tariffs are going to be suspended for 2 years for products coming from those 4 countries. Inflation Reduction Act gets passed. The administration initiates the Defense Production Act for solar panels and equipment. What is the state of the market now? Are projects at the utility scale recovering? Do you see more optimism out there? Are prices stabilizing? What does your crystal ball say?
Well, so as you noted, this year's been a hell of a year. We call it the solar coaster for a reason. Yeah, I thought I was going to lose my job back in April and May when there was going to be no panels for the foreseeable future. And then Inflation Reduction Act, and I thought, oh my God, I'll have so much work, I'll never know what to do. Here's where things are stabilized right now, and this is a snapshot in time, and this is important to note. The threat of the tariffs meant that anybody who wasn't under threat was snapped up. So the limited domestic supply we have is all sold out through 24. I've heard it's now potentially even sold out through 25. Folks over in those 4 Asian countries had to cancel their orders or had their orders canceled for them. And internationally, demand exceeds supply right now. There's a lot of countries that are trying to add solar. There's European demand, which no one planned on, but once Russia invaded Ukraine, it was European countries don't care what they pay for solar because it's cheaper than the natural gas alternative. So we're seeing overwhelming demand. In a snapshot in time, Tri-State, who serves many of the co-ops here in the state, they just put out a request for proposal for a couple 100 megawatts. And what we saw was that the bids that came back, and this is important to note, they have a pretty quick in-service date. So they need an in-service date here about roughly the next 2.5 years. The prices were double. So what we were seeing in 2019 for solar was about $17, $18, $19, $20 a megawatt hour in there. And the prices for this tri-state solicitation, they were in the mid to upper 30s, $34 or $36. So prices are more or less doubled. And the same was true with wind, and the same was true with batteries. Batteries are actually even greater than double. And that's because, well, everybody wants to buy an EV. And EV batteries are really the dog, and we're just the tail that wags when the dog decides to do so. What does that mean? It means that in the short term, we still have a supply crunch. Prices are still elevated. I think over the next 2 years, as we'll see a lot more domestic production come into play because of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think we'll also see a shaking out of some of the international supply chain. Fingers crossed, Russia is defeated in Ukraine, and so we don't have the kind of unexpected demand from European countries, that the prices will come down. I think that fundamentally solar as a technology is continue to follow the cost curve that we've seen with semiconductors, with wind. I think battery will do the same. As we build more and more of these, we get more and more efficient. And so I think that's the thing. But if you're buying a large scale solar system, if you're buying 50 megawatts today and it has to be in service, say by the end of 25, you're going to pay a premium over what you would have done a couple years ago. And I think is what Excel is hoping for on their 5 gigawatts, 5,000 megawatts, or 4,700 megawatts, is that by pushing out an in-service date where the power doesn't need to be delivered, say, until 28 or even 29, that prices will fall because of some of the stuff we talked about now, the short-term supplies things, and domestic manufacturing and more just general capacity will come online. Demand for solar has never been higher. Just from a customer perspective, I've got residential guys who are talking. If you call them today, they'll gladly come out in March to do something for you. They're that busy. I've got corporate demand continues to get higher and higher as Wall Street and consumers are saying, I only really want to buy from companies that are contributing to saving the earth, not destroying it. And then we see utilities a similar, they're under pressure from their own membership, if it's a co-op, or state regulators. Because one thing I didn't mention here is that Colorado was already doing the right thing from a policy perspective. We were already heading towards a clean energy future. The IRA just supercharges it and makes it cheaper for us. So it was a great delivery by our senators, Hickenlooper and Bennett, who were very, very involved in this conversation. Because I spoke to both of them and their staffs and said, look, we're going to do this anyway. You guys can either make it 30% cheaper for us by getting us a tax credit or not, but we're going to do it. So I think with that 10-year runway, the other stuff I've laid out, there's going to be a ton more solar installed. I mean, to give you again, like another sense of like ramifications where we're at, we roughly need 12 gigawatts of clean energy, and that assumes not everybody buys a Tesla or a Ford F-150. From when man started walking upright until the end of 2020, we didn't even have 2 gigawatts. We had like 1.8. So, we've got to build 10 gigawatts in 10 years. So you're going to see a lot more solar. You're going to see a lot more batteries. You're going to see quite a few more wind turbines as well. It's just what's going to happen,
Thank you. Starting into the audience questions, would a church be allowed to participate in the 30% rebate from the IRS as a nonprofit? I think that means the direct pay option in lieu of tax credit.
Correct. And the only question for the church is, do you have the capital up front to pay for it? If you do, then yes, Uncle Sam will write you a check. If you don't, or you don't want to tie up your capital in that, there are other options. I think I mentioned like a leasing option or what we call a power purchase agreement, where a third party will pay for it, provide all the capital, oftentimes take on the long-term operations and maintenance, because that is a thing to think about if you want to own a system, and in exchange for monthly payments from the church.
Can you talk about energy storage markets in Colorado related to this?
Sure. Right now, think of the smallest thing you can think of. And then the energy storage market in Colorado is smaller than that. So just to give you some sense of where we're at, our largest battery in the whole state is a whopping 5 megawatts on a 15,000 megawatt system. 5 megawatts. It's a rounding error. That belongs to Holy Cross. United Power with a 4 megawatt battery has held the ground for 3 years. So it is tiny. The number of Excel has 1.5 or 1.8 million customers, and they have less than 200 batteries, residential batteries. So there is no market in the state, and a couple of reasons why that's the case. One is I don't think Excel they can't make any money on batteries, so they've not been especially proactive on it. They are bringing on about 200 and some megawatts later next year, so they'll quickly. That's in a Pueblo County project. Will have that, so that will come on. That'll take the crown for quite some time. But everybody else we had in the folks in the tri-state family were frozen because when United did bring their battery online, Tri-State sued them. So that was what are we doing there? No one else wanted to get sued by their generation transmission provider. And then some of the munis have just been a little bit slower in taking that up. In 10 years, I'll probably tell you, think of the largest thing you can think of, and the battery market in Colorado is bigger than that. It's driven for a couple reasons, but on the residential side, folks are definitely worried about resilience, definitely worried about, what happens if the lights go out. Um, as electricity is the basis of civilization. So when the power goes out, literally nothing works. Even if you have natural gas heating like I do, my thermostat doesn't work. So I still am cold. Doesn't really matter, right? So that's driving it. I think our distribution co-ops and munis are now really getting on board because they're seeing a future where, uh, you know, smaller batteries like Holy Cross has, like United has, can have real impact on their bottom line, but they can also strategically locate them within their service territory to provide additional resilience. We've kind of browbeat Excel, and so their next request for proposal that's coming out next month is going to require them to probably purchase 1,000 megawatts, so a lot. And then we also took them to task for lacking a residential program, and we just got a very healthy incentive for folks within the Excel territory. So much so that a combination of a federal tax credit, there's a state income tax credit starting next year of 10%. Also, your battery should be tax free. We got that into statute last year as well. And Excel's credits would take a Powerwall, which is kind of retailing for around 12,000, down to about 4,500 bucks. So we think that, by dropping the price by nearly 2/3, we'll see a lot more batteries within the Excel territory. I know that is not your guys' territory down there, where you're at. I will say that to their credit, Black Hills has a very robust plan. It just needs to be approved. I think you'll see they're looking to add a lot of batteries. And then co-ops are kind of hit or miss. There's some co-ops that are really looking at trying to do some interesting things. I think San Isabel, for example, has some big plans as part of their kind of broader energy services belief. And then, I was out in Southeast Colorado, that cooperative batteries aren't even on the radar. So that's kind of a hit or miss. Fort Collins offers incentives. So, all kinds of things. But I'm long batteries because we're so short right now.
By the way, we have attendees from all over the state, so your
Okay.
comments, no matter where they fall, resonate with someone. If I could just add to that too, and ask for your comments. A provision in the IRA that is new in the industry is a tax credit for standalone energy storage, meaning not tied to a solar system or wind. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So it's a huge win. And it doesn't matter the size. So if you've had solar on your home for a year or 10 years, you've had it for 10 years, I applaud you. You made a hell of a decision 10 years ago when it was really expensive. But if you've had it on there for regardless, you can now go get a battery and get 30% off. So that's great. If you've got worries about resilience, you'd like to just be able to absorb more of that free power that falls on your roof, that's fabulous. But really the big difference is for utilities, which are going to buy large amounts of batteries, is that they can now buy just a standalone battery and place it strategically, generally at substations, but not always. We have some high schools that are going to get batteries. We have a homeless shelter in Denver that's getting a battery, and you can put it there, and the battery can do, lithium-ion batteries can do lots of things. And so so for example, the homeless shelter has a problem where for some reason the circuit they're on just seems to go out. Excel spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And they said, while we're doing this, we're going to put a battery here so that the homeless shelter doesn't lose power. Because when they do, people can't shower, they can't feed the folks. It's a real problem. You can't keep warm. And so they're putting a battery there to provide backup power. This now gets to be 30% off. Before you would have had to pay full retail price. Now you get 30% off. Other utilities, I talked to Sangre de Cristo. They have a substation that they could upgrade for lots of money. That for like a maybe reason, they think that maybe that the amount of power that's going to draw through that substation at some point is going to exceed the current capacity of their hardware. So they could spend tens of millions of dollars upgrading that. But they're looking instead at saying, well, what if we just put a battery on there for, say, $1 million or $2 million, and at least in the meantime, it buys us a little bit of wiggle room. If that demand for electricity does grow, then we'll be able to, we can still backfill with the additional hardware. But if it doesn't, we didn't upgrade this system and give I mean, they don't have a whole lot of folks within the SECRES, co-op, give them all a huge bill for something they didn't need. So it gives additional flexibility. Before, when batteries were 30% more expensive, it really didn't pencil, and now it makes a lot more sense. So I think we'll certainly see standalone storage strategically placed throughout the the utility service territory to meet very specific needs. And honestly, as a customer, you'll probably never see it. But that's what a lot of utilities are looking at right now, is that. So
I like the way this person is thinking. The question is, I have a residence in Fremont County. I'm looking to be very energy efficient. What is the best way to leverage the new Inflation Reduction Act to convert my home to solar? I want to use taxpayer money, not mine.
Just a quick reminder, we're all taxpayers, but yes, we actually, as a public policy, we want you to use taxpayer dollars. That's why this was passed, right? Okay, so there's a couple of things to do. First thing we do is make sure that your house is efficient as possible. The easiest thing to do is to ensure that you're not using any extra kilowatts, and then we'd want to size your system accordingly. So Fremont County, I'll admit the solar installers in that neck of the woods, there's few and far between, but I'm happy to, you can jump over to the COSA website. We have a directory. You can see some folks that are serving that part of the state. So first things first, do an energy efficiency audit. Make sure that your windows are all up to, caulked up and they're not breezy, that you're using LED lights. You've got an efficient furnace. If you're going to move over to like a heat pump hot water heater, right? And so you're understanding what your total demand is going to be. Maybe you change out your electric range, your electric resistance range for an induction electric range, or a gas, remove your gas range. You need to do all that first, so you understand exactly what the power needs are, and then you can put the solar on the roof to size to that. What you don't want to do is go in and put the solar in first, and then realize that you're either going to increase your electricity usage because you are going to trade out some of your gas for electric, or B, you got to buy LEDs because that's all you can get at Home Depot anyway. And once you start doing, getting rid of those old incandescents and you put LEDs in, your power usage drops, and now you're producing more power than you need, and you're paying for more panels than you need. So that's the way to go. Certainly, you should be looking at and talking with your electrical contractor, your solar contractor. What are some of the other things that are in the IRA? So there is money to upgrade your panel. I think it's $3,000. There is money to help you with a heat pump if you want to change out your gas boiler for an electric one. There is money for an electric, for a heat pump hot water heater. If you want to go electric vehicle, there's money for charging. So you want to kind of touch all that. I will say that the rules on how to access that are a little unclear to me. Those are still being written by Treasury. Department of Labor has a hand in it. So it may behoove you to wait till next year. If you're going to buy a battery, everybody, wait till next year. Starting January 1, you get a 10% tax credit here in Colorado State for your battery. So, you can put your order in now, but don't have them energized until after January 1st, because they'll save you 10% off your Colorado state taxes.
Among the programs you described, what programs can nonprofit utilities not participate in?
The ones I described. You can do it all. I don't think there's anything that is only open to investor-owned utilities. I think you can do it all. I mean, I think there's some question about whether you should do it all. We talked about hydrogen or carbon capture, and whether that's the role of a utility is probably a very robust board level discussion or member discussion. But there's nothing in the IRA that would preclude a nonprofit co-op from doing any of the measures in there. The only thing that could be tricky is if you choose to self-develop a solar or wind project, whether you have the right staff to pay prevailing wage, and if you have federal apprenticeship programs. So my guess is you pay prevailing wage, because if you don't, your people are going to get snapped up by somebody else because there aren't enough electrical professionals in the state. But if you don't have a federal registered apprenticeship program, you would miss out on potentially 12% of the investment tax credit, or 7/10 of a cent on the production tax credit.
And let me toss one other item in there too, especially for the nonprofits, but actually for any utility, there is an additional tax credit bump in there for providing solar to low and moderate income families. So a solar garden, for instance, that serves a minimum of 50% of the customers or their subscribers are low, moderate income. So that number of 50% that you mentioned, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but that can actually go up to 60% if you're serving low income families.
So that provision, and there's a lot of debate, which is why we need some rules from Treasury. It really is a legal question. So you get 10% if you're in these energy communities, which I spoke about. And it appears as though they say, or in the text, they say, or you have 50% of your off-takers are low and moderate income, right? But then later on, there's another provision which seems to imply you could get both. So I think if you could get both, then yeah, you get up to 60%. But I think my guys right now are penciling all their projects very conservatively and saying it's either one or the other. And if Treasury comes out and says, no, both are cool, then obviously if you could make a pencil before, you can really make a pencil now. Your savings are even 10% greater. So there is some debate, but I think in practice, most everybody's looking at it saying, let's just go with the 10%. And if we surprise to the upside, great.
But I think it's good for nonprofits and especially rural co-ops to know that that extra 10% does exist for low moderate income if they primarily serve those communities. Let's see. I saw one in here about energy audits. Is there a credit for energy audits?
I knew people were going to ask me very specific questions about some of those things. I believe you get like $100 up to, or not $100, $1,000 on an energy audit. I have a little cheat sheet. Let me just quickly find audit. Oh no, there it is. Oh, of course, my cheat sheet says credit available for energy audit, but I don't know how much money. Sorry. So the answer is yes. I don't know how much it is, and actually one of the best places to go for that is probably your utility. They may not know either because, like I said, some of these rules have not yet been written, but they're probably a good place to start for sure. Because ultimately it'll be them. Like you may get the credit, but it's just going to be you're going to pay them with that money. So it's in the utility's best interest.
I know there was definitely language in the Title V section of the Act dealing with the rebates for low moderate income families for energy audits, but I don't remember whether there was a tax credit in there for folks with higher income levels. So that's an excellent question.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a tax credit. I think it is just a straight up rebate. I think there's going to be some application process potentially to the EPA or others that'll just fill it out, send it.
So next question: with nonprofits now able to take advantage of the tax credit, meaning the direct credit or direct payment in lieu of credit of tax credit, do you anticipate PPA and lease rates to go down since they now have that competition?
No, but not because they don't have a competition, but because the interest rates are up. So I think you'll see the cost of energy where somebody has to put up capital will be higher. So that is I don't think you'll actually see that go down. So that's probably less great from a PPA provider standpoint because now they've got a double whammy against them. But we'll see. I think it's very early days, and I've talked to lots of my folks who do these third-party BPAs and who have historically worked with nonprofits, and they still think that many of the nonprofits just don't have the cash on hand to do these projects, and also are worried about long-term operations and maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
So
Here's an excellent question. The investor-owned utilities want to treat renewable like a central power plant. The rise of virtual power plants in the EU teaches that decentralized deployments allow local owners of distributed energy resources to create additional value streams like ancillary services and T&D deferrals. Will the IRA help to deploy virtual power plants here?
Darn good question. How about I say no, but yes. No, in the sense that we don't have a structure in Colorado yet for there to be the ability for someone to aggregate all those assets into a virtual power plant. So we've seen that work in other places. We saw it work in California this last summer. We've seen it work in Northeast United States, where they have a market structure that works to do that. Colorado, we don't. And it is generally, especially within the investor-owned utility space, seen as competition to the investor-owned utilities who wish to build things. They get, they don't make any money selling electrons. They make all their money building things. So when you and your neighbors combine to become a virtual power plant, that's stealing the ability for the investor-owned utility to actually go build a real power plant, make 10% on that. So I suspect that that is still coming. We have a couple things. First, I'm not done yet. I'm not dead and I'm not retiring. So I'm still pushing this because I think it's vitally important. The other is by 2030, Colorado is under state law mandated to get into a market. And that market will almost certainly be have to have rules in place for virtual power plants. So that's my no. But here's my yes. My yes is you can't have a virtual power plant if you don't have a lot of solar and a lot of storage distributed and installed all over the place. So my yes is the IRA will get you and your neighbor to put solar on the roof. Maybe you'll add a battery because it's so cheap, or somebody who down the street who's had a battery or had solar for a long time will add a battery for backup. And so when those rules and that market structure comes in place, and there's a chance for folks to bid in, I think it's Ohm Power was the one that was doing it in California. Sunrun is up in the Northeast, assembling all this via software and communications, and then being able to produce the power that's needed for the grid when it's needed. You'll be able to do. There'll be assets on the grid. There'll be stuff on the grid that then can be aggregated together. So that's my yes and no answer.
Other than continuation of the 30% tax credit, how does the IRA benefit residential solar installer companies in Colorado?
I mean, it gives you 10 years of that. So we were looking, this year was going to be 26, next year was 22, and then it was 0. So for residential solar installer companies, a couple years out, it was going to be Armageddon. Their product was overnight going to go up by 22%, down from 30%. So I think that's a key thing. There is a bunch of money in there. Actually, I think it's in the infrastructure bill that provides for workforce training, which is we are chronically understaffed in the solar and storage space. We need everybody from the traditional boots on the roof to master electricians, to marketing and sales folks, to HR. And so I think that's another way that we will see a benefit. That money is primarily flowing through community colleges and workforce development offices. But COSA is involved in those conversations, and we're trying to help direct those institutions of learning towards curriculum that is valuable, so folks can graduate and immediately get onto the job site or get into the office and provide value day one. So those will probably be the two things. I think the energy standalone energy storage means that you can call up every customer that you've ever installed solar on and offer them a battery now. So that's another revenue stream. Going back to a customer that you've worked with and and trust you, I think that's a key element as well. Because for our solar folks, you got to keep diversifying product. Once you sell someone a solar system, it's pretty much going to be on their home for 20 years, and they're not going to really be adding to it. You might have a maintenance call or two, but really it's about how do we continue to add more and more product as a way to continue to bring in revenue to keep those companies going.
We had one of our audience members say that the energy audit qualifies for 30% tax credit up to $150. But again, I believe that for low income families, it's a direct pay option. It's part of the rebate package that they can get up to $14,000 a year. So thank you for whoever, actually Tim provided that, so thank you for that. Any thoughts on agrivoltaics?
I have lots of thoughts on agrivoltaics, some of which could get me fired. Current state of agrivoltaics is a spork. It is neither as good as a fork or as good as a spoon, but there are certain places where it works perfect, much like you might use a spork. At your kitchen table, you have a fork and you have a spoon. And
I'm sorry, Mike, could I just interrupt for a second? For those in our audience that may not know what that term means, can you just do a quick explanation of agrivoltaics?
Sure. So agrivoltaics is the idea that you can do agriculture alongside or quite literally underneath solar panels. So we have one operating agrivoltaics facility here in Colorado. It's in Boulder County. It's Jack's Solar Garden, and it's a phenomenal kind of working research facility. So the idea, I mean, in a perfect world, right, I would put in solar panels and then I'd grow crops underneath them. I'd grow alfalfa and I'd grow corn or wheat. But in reality, that's just not how it works. Primarily, there's a couple of issues. One is we want to put our panels as close together as possible, so we can lease the least amount of land we need, because lease payments are expensive. And John Deere doesn't make, a combine that's, I don't know, 12 or 15 feet across. They're 60 meters and more, right? So we have a disconnect even between the needs of the solar facility and the needs of agriculture. We've seen it work in a couple of places, and they have a very niche, much like a spork does. They have a very niche kind of role to play. So we've seen any places where you have hand-picked crops. This is one of the things that Jack's Solar Garden does really well. So hand-picked crops where you're not going to use mechanized cultivation. Those are great because actually the panels cool and retain water. So those crops tend to do better, and the panels are high enough up that you can walk down the rows and you can pick the raspberries, or you can pick some of those hand-picked crops. Those have worked very well. We've also seen in parts of France where they're doing agrivoltaics over the tops of the vines. Again, vines are hand-picked, but that keeps the heat down and keeps the moisture closer to the grapes, and so that makes for better, healthier grapes, especially as France has faced, I think, 3 summers now of just scorching weather. And as a gentleman who enjoys a good French wine, I appreciate what they're doing. And then the third thing that we've seen is sheep. So sheep are scared and sheep are stupid, so they're great. You can actually use sheep to take care of your weeds on your solar facility, and they don't do anything to the solar facility. If you have goats eat everything. They'll crunch a wire and they'll electrocute themselves. They'll jump up on the panels. Goats are bad. Cows are bad. You know why? Because they like to scratch, and they're huge animals that lean up against the trackers. And as they do that over time, the tracker gets less and less perpendicular to the ground and starts messing with the ability for the solar panels to capture all of the sun. I will say that's not the final word. And I want to be very clear on that. That is the current state of agrivoltaics. There is a lot of interest and a lot of research and a lot of money going into how do we do this better? What if we put the panels up higher so that the cattle could walk underneath them and maybe not rub against them, or you put the poles, you put the steel deeper. All of those are possibilities. They all add cost, right? What we generally find is that farmers and ranchers are smart folks. They're small business people that know this part of their land is productive, this part of their land is not. And they're not going to have a conversation about their productive land that's going to earn them more than the lease payment from the solar facility or from the wind facility. They're going to say, hey, what about this dry land back here? what do you want to do with the scrub land that I can't do anything with? Could I, and it's worth maybe 25 or 50 bucks an acre, your $500 an acre for solar makes a lot of sense. So that is really what we see in reality, is that farmers and ranchers are not typically taking their well irrigated, highly productive land and putting solar on it or putting wind on it. They're trying to get it on land that doesn't perform for them. The biggest difference, or the big one place where that isn't the case, is on the western slope. Private land tends to be irrigated just de facto, and the stuff that wasn't irrigated was given to the state or claimed by the federal government. The trickiness in trying to install solar on federal land or even state land means that many of my guys on the western slope are talking to private landowners about leasing their land, and that land kind of inherently in the history of how the land was allocated has water rights and is irrigated. So we are running into trouble. In Delta County, there was a project over there that is on irrigated land. The county commissioners there did not appreciate the solar, and then as the first time through, denied a permit. The developer came back. They actually added sheep to the mix, so they're going to run more agriculture on that. And they also talked about ways to ensure that the water rights would stay with the land and not be sold, because that's another concern the communities have. You're going to put 500 acres of formerly irrigated land underneath solar. What happens if the farmer sells that water to those 500 acres? Because once it goes to Denver, once it goes to Aurora, Castle Rock, it's never coming back. And so that is a legit concern from communities, and we're trying to work with them. The solar industry is trying to work with them to figure out how do you balance landowner rights with community rights and community good. And it's a tricky thing. And if you're listening, call your county commissioner and let them know, because they oftentimes don't know either. So, but that got me a little further away from agrivoltaics, but that is maybe on the western slope where we are seeing that conflict. But on the eastern plains, within the Front Range, solar tends to end up on very unproductive land.
And we had one comment that pollinator habitat is the easiest for agrivoltaics. That you can boost production of crops nearby by bringing in pollinators.
Correct. If it has irrigation, or if it has water or water rights, right? If the native grasses don't support a pollinator habitat, forcing a developer to put pollinator habitat in there often requires them to go get water. And there's a really bad example of how that all shook out in Adams County.
And just a time check, Mike, we have about 20 minutes left. We have plenty of questions to fill that time. This is a good chance to maybe clear up some confusion. If only 3 cents per kilowatt hour is paid, why bother? My current rate is 14 cents per kilowatt hour. I think that might be confusing the utility scale production tax credit with the residential 30% tax credit.
Correct. Yeah, the 3 cents would be how much the solar developer would receive from the federal government. If you're a Colorado resident and your solar system, a residential solar system, you qualify what's called net energy metering, and the energy that you consume, you get credited at full retail rate, and then also the energy that you export to the grid will also be credited to you at full retail rate. There's some limitations to that. I'm happy to go into that, but if you're paying 14 cents right now and you were to put solar on your roof, whatever you consumed, your meter spins backwards, so you get full credit for that full 14 cents. And then whatever you pump out to the grid will also get you 14 cents.
Which has a shorter payback, solar or wind for a commercial project?
Size. Whatever's bigger is the answer. The way to lower costs within the renewable development world is build it bigger. So if I have a 600 megawatt wind farm and a 200 megawatt solar farm, the wind farm will win. And the reverse would be true. So I think there's a million variables within there, things like land and lease prices, things like how much it costs for you to interconnect to the system. If you're able to interconnect at a low price, say $1 million, and the other project has to interconnect at $15 million, that will mess it up. But predominantly size.
Vehicle to grid is the cheapest battery storage. Does the IRA cover connection of an EV and vehicle to grid?
It does give you a credit for a vehicle charger, and you can look for a bi-directional charger that will allow you to do that. To my knowledge, there's no utility in the state that has currently authorized a bi-directional charger, so you'll be in a fight with your utility on that. But yes, you can get some money for a vehicle. You get some money for a charger that should allow you to do vehicle to grid if your local utility will allow you to do vehicle to grid.
And there's also money available for electrician to upgrade your electric service now, which is something new in the IRA, which did not exist before.
Yeah.
Let's see. Will policy in Colorado be sufficient to facilitate the construction of high voltage transmission to deliver the renewable energy to the loads?
No. There was a big step forward this last year with the creation of the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority called the CETA, and it gives the state the power to build transmission if the utilities won't. It even has eminent domain and bond authority, the ability to issue bonds. Transmission is a huge undertaking. Currently, it takes about 10 years to build lines. I think we're seeing more and more communities understand that there's some inherent value in being on those transmission lines, but I think we're still going to have a need to change policy around land use. I think we're also probably going to need to see some changes around who can build it. So right now the utilities can build it, the CETA can build it. There is interest in private transmission developers to be able to build transmission in the state. There's one line that is going from Wyoming all the way out to Las Vegas, but it's just flying over Colorado, and it's not being part of our system. And I think there's still a discussion we've had about if private developers want to build transmission, and they should be.
This is a comment, not a question, but I like it because he's thinking like a fellow engineer here. Replace ethanol cornfields with solar and get more than 25 times the distance in an electric vehicle versus an ethanol vehicle. So I would say yes, thumbs up to that. Are there tax credits for homeowners for the purchase of biomass heating stoves?
Oh boy.
We had to give you one stumper.
I'm gonna have to just, I have no idea. Oh, my cheat sheet says that you can get biomass stoves and biomass boilers are eligible for $2,000 in aggregate. What am I in aggregate from? But it looks like yes. The answer is yes. The actual number, I'm not totally clear. Maybe I guess if you get a stove and a boiler, you get a total of 2,000 total. I'm not sure. Again, not my space, but yes is the answer.
And the last one is actually just a comment. Someone who has apparently the IRA open up right in front of them that states the service panel upgrade is 30% up to $600. So that's good to know, and that can apply to connecting solar or having to increase from 100 amp service to 200 amp service because you're bringing in an electric vehicle. The cost of the electrician has always been a hurdle that is prohibitive for some people, and so this is really a good rebate this time around. Mike, everything else is just a slew of people saying thank you very much, that they really enjoyed the briefing, and I would like to add on to that. We can't thank you enough. I know how horrific your schedule is and how busy you are, and I really appreciate you taking time to join us tonight. So do you have any closing comments?
Just this. None of this happens without the folks on the call. Like, it wasn't that Senator Manchin just woke up one day and wrote this. Thousands of people were agitating through the last election and continued on. I was calling Senator Bennett on behalf of my members, but I know that Bennett's office was getting calls, same with Hickenlooper, same with many of the state reps who were open to this. And the same goes to the state capitol. 2 or 3 phone calls to a state rep can be enough to get them to pay attention to something or even change their vote. So I know election season is on us. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but please vote. Please get involved. You know, another thing that needs votes is your local co-op. They have a board of directors, many of whom have been in that seat so long that it actually conforms to their body. And it could be time for you to consider running for that position yourself, or putting together a coalition of folks who can find someone who can bring change, because this change doesn't happen. We still need to agitate for it. It is not a done deal. Many of these projects we're talking about need local support. We could have county commissioners saying no. We had county commissioners turn down projects in Pueblo this year. We had county commissioners turn down projects in Delta. Projects in Weld almost died. You know, I think we can't get a project built in Boulder County. God forbid that, you know, we have to try to build something in Boulder County. So all of this still, I would encourage you, just stay involved, pick a thing. Definitely go vote. If the next 2 weeks you're not thinking about voting, you got to vote. But even after that, pick a thing: county commissioner, co-op board, city council member. Right, your muni is controlled by your city council member, and it's about budget time. So show up, zoom in, and say, I need more. Because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And obviously, if you're tuning in on a Wednesday night to hear about the Inflation Reduction Act, this is passion. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. And oh, if you want to get solar for your house, get 3 bids. 3 bids, no less than 3 bids. The guy who knocks on your door, even though he's very cute and very trustworthy and really wants to sell you a system today, go get 2 more bids. 3 bids minimum. That's the other thing.
Mike, you triggered one outstanding final question from the audience. What's the #1 action policymakers in Colorado can take on to promote the maximum amount of renewable energy in Colorado? And we'll finish with that.
I would like to see our policymakers take an additional run at distributed generation and kind of the grid, and really put our utilities. So we've told our utilities, go get clean energy, which is fine. They're all doing it. And that's really a big win. But the next step is, what's your planning on your distribution system for resilience? Where are we trying to put in solar and batteries? Who's going to get it? And I think there's a real question about the future of distributed generation as it contributes to the overall well-being of the state, whether that's resilience, whether that's equity. And so I'll tell you, COSA has some ideas. We don't even have them fully formed and bill language or anything like that. But we're really thinking about distributed generation, solar and storage. What's its role? Who gets it? Who benefits from it? And how does the utility plan for it in a way that promotes resilience and equity and those kind of things? So that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for an outstanding session. I just want to remind our audience that this lecture in its entirety, including the question and answer, will be posted at CRES-energy.org, as well as a copy of Mr. Kruger's slides. And I just want to thank everyone that took time out on their Wednesday night to join us. So good night all. Thank you.
Thank you.